Sure, there is a population living at the edge of the world who were thought to be well understood. Their story, according to textbooks, seemed almost self evident. They arrived late, they came from Asia, they adapted to extreme cold and stayed. The map was neat, the migration was clean compared to other indigenous histories. The Inuit appeared to be one of the more straightforward cases in the entire record of human movement. Scientists pointed to their tools, linguists pointed to their languages, anthropologists pointed to their physiology. Everything agreed. Everything, that is, until the genomes arrived. Because when researchers began comparing Inuit DNA against populations worldwide, not just neighboring groups, not just regional samples, but genuinely global genomic databases, the picture that emerged did not match the clean story. One population showed a signal, one specific, geographically distant, historically unexpected population carried a genomic echo that no migration model had predicted, not the group anyone had named, not the region anyone had mapped. What followed was not the confirmation of what we thought we knew. It was the beginning of a much older, much stranger question. The conventional story of the Inuit begins roughly 5,000 years ago in what is now Siberia and northwestern Alaska, the dominant scholarly framework built across decades of archaeology, linguistics, and physical anthropology. Ilsmer identified the Inuit and their ancestral populations as part of a migration distinct from the earlier waves that had populated the rest of the Americas. Those earlier migrants, the ancestors of most indigenous North and South American peoples, Poles, had crossed the Bering Land Bridge approximately 15,000 years or more before the Inuit. The Inuit came later, they came differently, and they left clear evidence of their unique adaptations, sophisticated cold weather technology, specialized maritime hunting, a language family Eskimo Aleut that had no convincing relatives anywhere outside the Arctic corridor for a long time. This framework was considered one of the more secure conclusions in the archaeology of the Americas. The timing was supported by radiocarbon dates. The tools, particularly the Thule culture artifacts, which precede the modern Inuit, showed clear technological progression from Siberian origins. The spread across Arctic Canada into Greenland, reaching it around 1000 CE, was documented with reasonable confidence. Even genetic studies from the early 2000s seem to confirm the broad outline. The Inuit were genetically distinct from other Native American groups, more closely related to Siberian populations, and showed signs of a separate founding event. This was the settled map it held for years, but there were anomalies, small ones at first, then larger ones. Researchers working in the field noticed that certain genetic variants found in the Inuit did not distribute the way a simple one-wave Siberia to Alaska to Arctic model would predict. If you draw a straight migration line and expect the populations at the end of that line to reflect it cleanly, the Inuit's genomic landscape had a few frequencies that pointed sideways. Not dramatically, not in ways that overturned the model immediately, but in ways that left careful scientists writing careful footnotes. There were also questions about timelines that linguistics kept raising. The internal diversity of the Eskimo Aleut language family suggested a deep root, but how deep mattered, and whether it connected to any known Asian language family remained genuinely unresolved. Attempts to link Eskimo Aleut to broader Siberian language families produced results that were intriguing, occasionally compelling, and repeatedly inconclusive. the linguistic signature of the Inuit said, "We are old and our origin is complicated." The genetics at that early stage was still catching up. Then whole genome sequencing changed the scale of the question entirely. First, when genomic science moved from examining small panels of genetic markers to analyzing hundreds of thousands of data points across the entire genome. The resolution improved dramatically. Earlier studies were like sketching a face from a distance. Whole genome sequencing was like walking close enough to see the details. And in that detail, hidden patterns became visible. Several research groups working through the 2010s and into the 2020s began conducting broader comparative analyses. They were asking a deceptively simple question. When you place Inuit genomes alongside populations from across the globe, not just Arctic neighbors, not just Siberian groups, not just Native American samples, where do the strongest and most unexpected affinities emerge? Who, genetically speaking, else carries signals that overlap with the Inuit in ways that cannot be explained by recent contact or geographic proximity alone? The mitochondrial DNA told one part of the story, but the Y chromosome told another. Autosomal data, which captures both maternal and paternal ancestry across the whole genome, averaging across thousands of generations, told the deepest story of all. And what the autosomal data kept returning to was a signal pointing somewhere specific, somewhere that the standard migration model had not prepared researchers to expect. If you are finding this investigation as compelling as the evidence made it for researchers, let's consider subscribing, because this is one of many stories in which the genome reveals a human past that the history books have not yet caught up with. Philippim, let us be precise about what the signal was and was not. It was not a claim that the Inuit were secretly descended from some distant civilization. Well, genomics does not work in dramatic revelations of that kind. What the data showed and what multiple independent analyses began converging on was that among all the world's populations tested, one group outside the Arctic showed a statistically meaningful genomic affinity with the Inuit that could not be easily explained by the accepted model. That group was not a neighboring Siberian population. It was not a First Nations group from the Pacific Northwest. It was not an East Asian sample from China or Japan. The population that consistently returned the strongest unexpected match came from a different direction entirely. Researchers found that a specific indigenous population in what is now the interior of South Asia, broadly speaking, Manjib, within the genomic landscape associated with populations that carry ancient lineages traceable to some of the earliest modern humans to disperse out of Africa and into southern Eurasia, showed a level of shared ancestry signal with Inuit samples that demanded explanation. This does not mean the Inuit came from South Asia. It does not mean there was a sailing route or a contact event between the Arctic and the subcontinent. Science is careful with what evidence can and cannot support. What the data suggests instead is something more architecturally interesting: a shared ancestral population, a ghost lineage, a branch of early humanity that contributed to both populations at a time before their respective migrations locked them into opposite ends of the earth. Well, the story did not collapse, it widened. To understand why this matters, we need to think about how populations actually form, not as history textbooks tend to describe them, as tidy migrations of culturally coherent groups, but as the messy, layered, overlapping processes that genomics has revealed them to be over the last 2 decades. 3 major frameworks have emerged to explain the unexpected signal found in Inuit DNA. The first framework is the ghost population hypothesis. In this model, the Inuits' Siberian ancestors, before they ever reached the Arctic, were themselves descended in part from a now vanished population that had migrated east from a much more ancient dispersal, that ghost population, which left no living descendants we can identify directly. That contributed genetic material that appears in both the Inuit and in certain ancient lineages preserved in southern Asian populations today. The signal is not from recent contact at all. It is from a very old shared ancestor who existed perhaps 20 to 30,000 years ago, before the world's ice sheets reached their maximum extent. Therefore, before the Bering Land Bridge became the crossing point for the last waves into the Americas. The second framework involves ancient Siberia itself being more genomically diverse than previously understood. Recent ancient DNA studies have revealed that Siberia, particularly during the late Pleistocene and early Holocene, was home to a remarkable variety of human populations that mixed, moved and disappeared in complex patterns. One of those populations may have carried a signal that connects backward through deep time to southern dispersals that eventually left traces in both Southeastern Asian and South Asian genomes. In this model, the Inuits' unexpected affinity is inherited indirectly, ventures, through ancestral Siberians who were themselves more genetically layered than the simple Northeastern Asia label suggests. The third framework is perhaps the most architecturally elegant. It involves what genomicists call basal ancestry lineages so ancient that they predate the regional differentiations we normally use to classify human populations. Under this model, both the Inuit and certain South Asian groups independently retained fragments of a very old genomic substrate that most other populations lost through later migration and admixture. The Inuits' extreme isolation in the Arctic and similar isolation in certain South Asian population groups may have preserved these ancient fragments unusually intact. That what looks like shared ancestry is actually shared antiquity, two populations at opposite ends of the Earth, both quietly carrying a piece of the same very old human story. The study that shifted the conversation most decisively came with the expansion of ancient DNA sampling from Siberian archaeological sites. When researchers began sequencing individuals from sites like Yana, Malta, and Afantova Gora, some of the oldest human remains ever recovered from Arctic Siberia, Maine, dating back 24,000 years or more, they found something remarkable. These ancient Siberians did not match any single modern population cleanly. They were a blend. They carried ancestry that pointed both toward East Asian populations and toward something older, something that had affinities with populations further west and south. Majuras. Among the descendants of these ancient Siberians, as migrations eventually carried people east across Beringia and north into the Arctic, those older signals were inherited in varying proportions. The Inuit, as a group whose founding population was relatively small and whose Arctic isolation reduced subsequent admixture from outside, may have preserved those ancient signals more faithfully than populations who experienced greater mixing in intermediate geographies. There, when this ancient DNA evidence was layered over the modern comparative data, the match became less mysterious and more profound. Populae, the population that showed the strongest unexpected affinity with the Inuit, was not sending a recent signal, it was reflecting an ancient one. The genomes were not recording a meeting, they were recording a shared origin deep enough in time that the world those ancestors lived in looked nothing like the world we know. Not the group researchers initially expected, not the direction anyone had mapped. Stand for a moment in the geography that made these people. Imagine the coastline of the Beaufort Sea in late autumn. The sun has been absent for weeks. The sea ice is forming, groaning, shifting. Ayrshire, the temperature drops past the point where exposed skin fails in minutes. The wind carries no sound except itself. It is one of the most inhospitable environments on the planet. And yet, here in this absolute darkness and cold, a culture developed technologies and knowledge systems of extraordinary sophistication. And the Inuit invented tailored waterproof clothing from animal skins, building heat management into every stitch. They developed the kajak, the kayak, as hunting instruments so precisely engineered that modern designers still study its hydrodynamic properties. Bagger, they read sea ice as a living landscape, recognizing dozens of states and transitions that no outsider could name. They survived where almost no other human group ever tried. Venture, that survival was not only cultural, it was biological. The Inuit genome carries variants associated with cold adaptation shifts in fatty acid metabolism, thermoregulation, and body composition that have been studied in their own right. Their genome, in other words, was not just a record of where they came from. It was a record of what the Arctic demanded of them over thousands of years and how their bodies answered. The story of the Inuit is, at one level, a story about human possibility, about what people can survive and build at the edge of the world. But at a deeper level, the genomic level, it is a story about something we are only beginning to articulate clearly. The degree to which every living population on Earth carries, inside their cells, the traces of human encounters that happened so long ago that history has no words for them at all. Ursula, what does it mean that the Inuit, a people whose origin story seemed among the most geographically constrained in the entire human record, carry a genomic signal that connects them through deep time to populations at the other end of the Eurasian world? It means, first, that the story was never as contained as the map suggested. The Arctic was not a terminus. It was not where human migration ended and simplicity began. It was where one of the most spectacular adaptations in human evolutionary history played out. Layered on top of an ancestry that stretched back across the full sweep of Eurasian prehistory, it means, second, that the tools of genomics are making a particular kind of historical humility unavoidable. Every population we have studied in depth, every group whose origin story seemed settled has, under the light of whole genome sequencing, revealed additional layers. Older ancestors, unexpected affinities, ghost populations who left fingerprints but no names. The more carefully we look, the more we find that human history is not a series of separate streams flowing to separate conclusions. It is a web of connections, and some recent, some ancient, beyond our ability to describe easily, all of them woven into the genomes of people living today. And it means, third, something that science is careful to acknowledge and that deserves saying plainly. The Inuit are not diminished by complexity, the discovery that their ancestry is richer and more layered than the textbook story allowed does not make them less. It makes their history larger. It makes that the human story they are part of more honest. Researchers are not finished. New ancient DNA from Siberian, Beringian, and Arctic sites continues to arrive. Each new dataset refines the picture and sometimes surprises it. The specific identity of the ghost population, if one exists as a discrete source, has not been firmly established. The exact pathway through which the unexpected southern signal entered the ancestral Inuit lineage remains a subject of active research and genuine scientific caution. What has been established carefully through converging lines of evidence from multiple independent research groups is that the Inuit genome is not a simple record of a simple migration. Metaphor, it is a layered document. It preserves information about human movement and human mixing that happened at timescales so vast that the archaeological record cannot reach them. Well, only the genome can. The genome does not forget. That is perhaps the most important thing modern genomics has revealed about our species. Whatever happened, whatever meeting, whatever migration, whatever population that left no monuments and wrote no words the cells remember, long after the fire goes out and the camp disappears under ice, the molecular record persists. It moves forward through generations, diluting slowly but never fully disappearing, until one day a researcher running an analysis notices a signal that does not fit. A frequency that points somewhere unexpected, a match between people who should, by every conventional measure, have nothing in common. If you want more stories like this one stories, where the evidence rewrites the map, subscribe. There are far more of them hidden in the human genome than most of us have ever been told. The Inuit story is not finished. No story this old ever is. The genome keeps returning it to us, piece by piece, from a past so deep that the only honest response is awe and the willingness to keep asking what else we have not yet found.